Hola, hola, amiga. On today's episode, we welcome Melissa Llarena, a business coach and best-selling author, Fertile Imagination, a guide for stretching every mom's superpower for maximum impact. Melissa is not just an author, she's a force of nature, filled with personal and professional wisdom. As the creator of the Fertile Imagination to Networking Success group coaching program, Melissa has been empowering individuals to tap into their creative potential and achieve remarkable success. Her insights have reached millions through her contributions to Forbes Women, where her articles have garnered over 4 million views. Melissa is also the host of the Mom Founder Imagination Hub podcast, where she's interviewed unconventional thinkers like Gary Vee, Beth Comstock, and Susie Batiste, just to name a few. Her expertise has been recognized by major media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, and CNN Money. With a psychology degree from NYU, an MBA from Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business, and a certificate from the Transformational Coaching Academy, Melissa brings a unique blend of academic knowledge and real-world experience to her work. Today, you'll learn the importance of maintaining imagination and creativity as mamas, alongside practical strategies to integrate it into your daily life. We're going to discover why imagination is such a crucial superpower for mommies and how it can be cultivated and applied in both our personal and professional lives. Melissa emphasizes the value of building a supportive community, learning from different perspectives, and prioritizing dreams alongside madrehood. Our conversation also touches on overcoming imposter syndrome, and we know how that is, and how we can leverage what our prior generations did to push us forward. She also shares tips on networking, finding mentors, and maintaining energy and focus to achieving bold goals. Y'all, this conversation was amazing, and I am so inspired with all that she does. And so, without further ado, let's welcome Melissa Llarena. Welcome to the Viva la Mami podcast. I am your host, Jessica Cuevas. I am a mother of two on a mission to help redefine the meaning of motherhood as a modern Latina mom. Motherhood can be a complex journey, interwoven in two identities that often make us feel ni de aquí ni de allá. Viva la Mami is committed to providing you with knowledge, tools, and support to navigate the challenges and triumphs of motherhood as Latina moms. On the show, we'll be discussing culturally relevant topics that will help inform and empower you in whichever season you are in on your motherhood journey. We'll be joined by Latina moms, experts and professionals who can offer advice, practical tips, relatable stories, and honest conversations. So bring your cafecito as I invite you to be a part of this space as we create comunidad about the exciting and challenging parts of being a mommy. Ahora, vámonos. Hola, hola, Melissa. How are you?
Hello, Jessica. I am thrilled to be here with a fellow mom with gorgeous earrings. I love your earrings. Oh my God.
Thank you. I
Beautiful.
love your earrings too.
It's our beautiful earrings era, right? As
Yes.
moms, it's like it's the one thing that we could really decorate with consistency and ease.
Yes, yes. And it's the one accessory that stands out. And yes, so it's an earring kind of day. Well, Melissa, I am so excited to have you here. I met you at the Mom 2.0 back in April in Nashville. And so I'm really excited to be interviewing a lot of mamas that I met during that summit. And it's just always so exciting to hear and witness the work that you all do. And I am so, so honored to have you here porque you have a lot of wealth of knowledge, expertise, but also wisdom about just how, as moms, we can listen to our imagination and go further onto our imagination. Because oftentimes when we think about imagination, we think that this is something that little kids do. but no, we can do this too. And so I would love to learn more about this and our conversation. But before we delve into that, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. So I love the Spanglish. Yo puedo hablar así también, but I will be consistent with English because that's easier for me. That's the language in which I wrote my book. I think it would have been really, really hard, now that I think about it, to have written it in like Spanish. But I digress, right? So where did I grow up? So I would say in a 650 square foot apartment in Astoria, New York, Queens. And as someone who was raised by a mom who was a single mom who has manic depression, I will say I was raised in a very chaotic environment. So for me, being a Latina and just like learning Spanish and all of these things really came from my abuelas. And my Cuban abuela, so I'm Cuban and Puerto Rican, my Cuban abuela is the person that I dedicated my book to, Fertile Imagination, right? And it's all about this superpower, this gift we get when we become moms, which is this desire to do something that we may have never seen before in terms of the moms that have come before us or the moms that are around us. And for us, it's way beyond visualization and way beyond, silly Willy Wonka sort of imagination. It's about expansive thinking. And when you grow up, in an environment as I did, right? So volatile in a small apartment where I didn't have my own bedroom. I had half the living room and a daybed. And my mom even at one point had like a roommate too, who was amazing now that I think about her. It's been years. You have to have an imagination in order to imagine yourself, A, out of there, right? And B, you need to have some sort of grasp, although that's a bad word since I'm a meditation practitioner, but you need to have some sort of sense that there's something more beautiful, more amazing out there for you than maybe you may have seen from your own mom or dad or, grandma, grandpa, etc. So that shaped a lot of the future me, the me now as a mom of three little boys. And I'm physically based. It's so funny because mentally I'm always somewhere else, right? It's like as moms, it's like, but mom, I'm talking to you. But I'm physically based in Austin, Texas at the moment. And again, with that idea that I wanted to do things very differently and have a spirit of adventure and creativity, me and my family, we once lived in Australia for 3.5 years, which might feel kind of like weird, like as a Latina and family being very important, and a lot of my family and my husband's families being based in Queens, New York. It is really wild and random for us to have gone to Australia when neither of us had ever even visited and we didn't need to be there. But it was way too exciting of an idea that we made happen with very practical next steps. So I'm very grateful to the fact that, I was raised in an environment where I needed that superpower of an imagination. And I'm also grateful for becoming a mom because when I became a mom the second time around, so first I had a singleton. And so anyone that has twins, this is like new language. This is like insider language. But I had a singleton. So I had one boy. And then I went and I had identical twins about 2 years after. And so that obviously means I didn't sleep. Like that's just like a known fact, right? If you have one or two, right? And anyone listening, like think about every moment that you went without sleep and you probably didn't have time to like even daydream on your way to sleep, right? You would just like drop on the sofa, drop on the bed and like pray that you got some like real quality sleep until you did the same thing over again. So that for me was a sign that, okay, wait a minute. This is my new pattern. I'm now a mom of three. I'm not sleeping. And what I realized, and this is part of what I wrote in my book, is that I needed that in between time, that time that I was resting my head on the pillow and actually falling asleep to imagine of possibilities and imagine what I wanted to do next. And I wasn't getting that. And I was feeling very, very like unmotivated, It's like I couldn't even push myself. It's like, well, what is this about now? And as a business owner, if you can't be excited about your own vision, let alone have a vision, then you're toast. you know, you're total toast. So that was, again, in the spirit of my upbringing. I realized how important my imagination was. And I also realized how it helped me, look forward to something that I had never imagined was possible because I hadn't seen it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many good nuggets that you share here. And it makes total sense about how we can give ourselves permission to have imagination, right? And especially as moms, and as mujeres in general, I think that we were always told, dream big, reach for the stars and all of that. And then when we hit this sort of identity shift, and it's really an identity crisis, I would say, especially for, new moms or moms who are now having subsequent kids or any kind of big transition, any big life transition, we often then shut down and then we almost put ourselves as if there's no more room for, to dream big, to imagine. And so, first of all, I know that you sort of defined, the definition of fertile imagination, but for our listeners who aren't quite getting it or who don't understand the difference between fertile imagination and perhaps setting goals or dream big or, achievement, how do you kind of sort of contrast that definition, and how do you make it more so in tune to what you write on your book?
So I'll give you an example. When I first came up with the idea of writing my book, and anyone that's seen the video, you could kind of see it here. It's a little bit in a mirror format, but
I also
when I
have
came
it.
up Hey. So when I came up with that idea, right? Here's the difference. So a goal as a business owner, as a coach to mom founders, what I have found is once we have a goal, there's almost this like compulsion that we need to be pushed, right? So there's this push. So we're pushing uphill, we're pushing. When it comes to a fertile imagination and an idea that comes from a place of expansive thinking, there's a pull. There's a pull. You feel pulled, drawn to the idea that this, idea that you have or this desire you have, it could be writing a book, launching a business, doing a new product, it could be podcasting, whatever it is. There's this idea that pulls you out of bed, right? It's so funny. I am really stuck in that great adventure time frame when I was like a teenager. But when I knew I was going to great adventure the next day, there was no issue with waking up from bed at 6 a.m., 5 a.m. No issue. I was jumping out of bed because I had an adventure I was going on. So having a fertile imagination and having like an idea that inspires you it's feeling excited, and you don't need the caffeine. I know that's crazy talk for like mamas, right? Cafe on top of that. If there's any Colombianas listening, then forget it. But you don't need cafe, right? You have that source of fuel, that excitement, that enthusiasm, because it's coming from a place that's like ambitious but also outrageous. So when I first wanted to write my book, here's the difference. The goal is, okay, I want to write a book. I want to include people from around the world because I really believe that genius and using our imagination, it's not something that is only from a US perspective. Like it's a global thing, right? So just imagine, anyone in like your country of origin, anyone that's listening. So like in Mexico, you got Frida Kahlo, right? It's like, oh, what? It stopped there? No, there's a bunch of really creative, imaginative human beings all around the world. And if you have fewer resources, you've got to really use your imagination to do the same thing with what you have. So again, inspiring. So for me, what got me captivated with the idea of writing a book and finishing the book was a vision that I had. So I imagined my book going to essentially to Egypt. Like I saw myself going to Egypt and going to the first library in Egypt, so in Alexandria. And this I must have gone from like my time as a kid, social studies and all that. But I imagined myself going to that library in Alexandria and putting my physical book in the library shelf myself. And I thought to myself, that is inspiring. Here I am, a Latina that is going to the first library in the world, in the cradle of civilization, and I'm putting my book, my last name, Llarena, on the bookshelf.
Mhm.
Now, was it going to be like legal and like, in the Dewey Decimal System of the olden days? I didn't care. What was fertile about it? Productive, captivating. What pulled me? That big idea, right? So the goal versus the fertile imagination, two separate things. Goal, I'm going to have a book, period. That's the goal. But it's not juicy, right? But if I then see myself, not just I'm going to have a book, and I'm going to put it in the first library of like the world in Egypt. And what's a Puerto Rican Cuban book in Egypt? What's that doing there? That for me was like way more productive. That was more like fuel. That was like, oh, I want to see that vision come true. And it might sound silly. It might sound totally like, okay, seriously? But here's the beauty. And this is so different than what I hear. Here's the beauty. When I was raised by a mom who has manic depression, she would have these grandiose ideas. So, kind of like I'm going to put my book in the library in Egypt. However, my mom, because of her mental illness, wasn't able to execute on these ideas. They were
Mhm.
very, very like not going to happen. She wanted to be a doctor randomly, for example. And so here I am, a little girl looking at my mom with these big dreams, but I realized that, you know what? I could actually execute on my dreams. I have the mental capacity, health, the ability, and the education to execute on these things. So here's this, I'm going to put my book in the library in Alexandria in Egypt. It sounds totally wild and crazy. And you have 3 kids, and why are you going to do that? But for some reason, I believe in myself so much. And that's what I like to impart on my mom founder clients. I like to tell them that, you believe in your kids a lot. Well, you need to believe in yourself because
Mhm.
they don't listen to what we say. They obviously do what they see. And so you've got to be that example, right?
Yes, yes. Oh, I love it. I love it. And obviously, and I love what you said, how we believe in our kids, but
Mhm.
we don't give ourselves permission, to believe in ourselves. And kind of like what I mentioned in the introduction here at the beginning of our conversation, how we oftentimes, when we think about imagination, we only allow that for kids to have, but not for ourselves. And I often wonder how even our inner child is still yearning for imagination if we don't listen to
Mhm.
ourselves, right? And so, how does a mom know if her imagination is asleep, if that makes sense? Like, what if she doesn't give herself permission to imagine?
It's interesting because when I was marketing my book, I was also, really interested to see feedback that moms would have in terms of reading the book. And one mom named Jessica, also, funny enough, who is a social worker, has kids, and is really like surrounded by parents and just, the government and the system. She told me, she's like, I didn't even realize that my imagination was asleep. Like, I had no idea that it had paused. But I'll tell you what the clue is. So for her, she wasn't really getting these inspiring ideas in terms of what she would do next. Secretly, here's a social worker, secretly, she wanted to write a book. Now, was she actually executing on this idea? No, not really. What she was doing was spending money on learning how to write. And it's like, you write a lot of like, documentation at minimum as a social worker, and she attended NYU with me. So I'm just like, I really don't think writing's the issue. I think it's more about feeling super inspired to do some of these hard things and put yourself out there. And so for her, it was that. It's kind of like if you find yourself in a pattern where you're always waiting to feel ready to do something, start a business, a podcast, move to a different country, you just second guess yourself a lot and you don't feel like this pull, like, oh, I'm excited to do this or I've got an idea. If you're not hearing those ideas anymore, your imagination is asleep because there's 3 steps to actually building a fertile imagination. Step 1 is reawakening your imagination. And so the reawakening part that requires some stillness And it also requires you to be confident that if you have an idea, it was put on your heart for a certain reason. It's because you own it. Like it's for you. It's because you're capable of doing it. So reawakening it means, maybe playing with your child, maybe meditating, maybe prayer. It could be going to the Frida Kahlo house in Mexico City, so like going on a artist date, they call it. There's a book that really talks about this concept. So you want to be in an inspiring place. And here's the great thing. You could do this with your children. We
Mhm.
go to these places that are beautiful and colorful and imaginative and interesting and sensorial with our children. What's to say we couldn't be inspired by the same situation if we open ourselves up to that opportunity? So that's step one, right? So you want to reawaken your imagination. But then the second part, and this is what I love about this concept myself, is that you actually play with your imagination. So, you know how, like, if you ignore your kids get mad? Like, mommy, you ignored me. Mommy, but my brother hit me. Please do something about it. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But it's like, same thing with your imagination. So, if you have ignored your ideas for quite some time, they're not going to want to show up at your doorstep. It's like, well, why am I going to go and tell this person to write a book if, I already told her that like in 1997 or something? You know what I mean? So you play with your ideas. How do you play with your ideas? You play with your kids. So I tell moms that we have imagination experts in residence. We have
Mm.
imagination experts under our nose and to our disposal, right? So what if we do something a little different here? You want to launch a book, you want to do a business, you want to do a podcast. What if you have a conversation with your children, right? So they say, oh, explain your business idea as if I was a 5-year old or I was a fifth grader. Guess what? A lot of us happen to have 5-year olds and fifth graders. They help us simplify complicated things. So you're playing with the idea, maybe with your child, right? Maybe it's an opportunity to like literally explain to your child, well, if you're going to write a book, what are you going to write it about? Who's it for? Where are you going to put it? What colors might you choose on your cover? Do you know that my 3 sons, they can't agree on a lot of things, but they agreed on my book cover. Because at that point, I was just desperate. I was like, I need to get this out the door. It took me 2 years to write this. But you could bring your kids into the fold of your business or other categories of your life because they can inspire us to be more imaginative and creative. And by playing with them, they get us in our flow as long as we're not looking at our cell phones or thinking about our to-do list, right? And that's helpful because that gives the imagination an opportunity to just like flex its muscles.
Mm.
The third part to get to the fertile imagination is stretching your imagination. That means that once you have that idea, once you have stretched your muscles and figured out ways of, making that idea true or playing with your kids and just like being in a more inspired zone, then you have to tell someone else about your idea. So stretching your idea is about that, village that a lot of us look for in terms of raising our children, but this time it's pertaining to living out, our dreams, our goals, our ambitions. Like we need a village too if you want to launch a business or do a podcast. It's not just to be a mom. It's also
Mhm.
like a woman.
Yes, yes. And I always mention this, you are a woman first and then you are a mom. And that is something that I always share because at the end of the day, our kids are going to grow up. And regardless, if we feel like if we're not doing a good job as moms or what have you, if we are even thinking about that, that means that we are doing a good job. And while we're doing this job as moms, we should also be prioritizing on ourselves, right? And that is something that I always share. How can we bring that balance, between those two identities? And it is totally doable. I just think that oftentimes we are highly influenced with the things that we see on social media, and that we read or that we are being told from our abuelitas and our mamas, where oftentimes we see that self sacrificial kind of evidence from them. And this is what's Marianismo is called, right? Like they are putting themselves in this image of like self-sacrifice and even subordination and this image of La Virgen Maria, if you will. And all of this to say, we are, if we want to imagine, if we want to move further into what we essentially want to do in our own futures, obviously encompassing our families as well, it is totally doable. However, sometimes we put in that excuse, I would say, or it's fear too that we don't even want to imagine,
Mm.
And as Latinas, again, from a cultural standpoint, as women, we have always been told to behave a certain way, to look a certain way, to present ourselves in a certain way in front of society, really. And being said, like all of these messages being so ingrained in us,
Mm.
it almost makes us feel stuck and not able to even imagine, right? And so, what would you say to a mommy who is perhaps wanting to imagine that, maybe she has tinkered the thought about going out of the country, because honestly, that's me right now. Like my husband and I were like, should we go to Mexico for a year? Like, let's get our dual citizenship and then let's just go for a year. But for some reason, we are feeling this level of feeling stuck, right?
Right.
Because it's out of that fear, pero también it's like, well, what are other people going to say? Or I don't know anyone else who has been doing this. So, how can you tell someone who feels stuck to essentially go further and imagine and consider your fertile imagination? What are some kind of ways or strategies to help someone shift that mindset?
Very practically. So, in a group coaching program I have, right, for mom founders, the focus is finding people that can be your mentors, right? So, it's really, saying that I want to take ownership for building my business out in how I need it to look based on the fact that I'm in this season of motherhood. I don't want to rely on like the algorithm. No, I want to create opportunities very intentionally. So the same thing can be done whether you have a business or not. So, for example, let's say you wanted to live in Mexico. I know, random example. But let's say you wanted to live in Mexico, or anyone that's listening says, you know what, France is looking really good right now with the Olympics, or maybe, some other part of the world is really calling you, right? What I would say as like a very first next step is for you to honestly, this is going to sound like the most boring like tool, but go to LinkedIn. I know it's crazy. And anyone listening, by the way, you could find me on LinkedIn and I would encourage you to connect with me. I could even be your mentor if you wanted to go to Australia as an example. But let's just say go to LinkedIn. I know, sounds boring, but go to LinkedIn. Why not Instagram, where a lot of us moms are, right? Because Instagram, it's like, I don't even know what to say. It's artsy, it's creative, and you're going to get stuck there and you're going to be in that rabbit hole. So go to LinkedIn and find someone that you might be connected to who has lived in Mexico, as an example, right? And so I want you to also be very, very open. So this is where you're using your imagination and you have guts. So let's say you have been a mom outside of the job market. Let's just imagine this. You haven't been working in like a corporation. The person who happens to live in Mexico or once did, you haven't spoken to them for like 10 years. I know this is the fact for so many of us that decided to leave, conventional careers, whether it's teaching or corporate or whatever. So here's the thing. You add so much value to anyone that you encounter beyond your career. You're a mom. Here's what I know about us. If there's a problem, chances are we can be creative and inventive enough to solve it as long as it's something to do with our kids. Or as long as it's something to do with our home or their school, right? So we're really creative. We use our imagination for a lot of things. This is your opportunity to use it for something that's on your heart that was going to make you, mommy, a happier mommy. So you go to LinkedIn and you say to yourself, okay, here's this person. I knew them, 10 years ago. I know, you might know that they have a child. You might know that, right? And you could just connect with them on that level. On that level, be like, hey, I right now have this crazy idea. Don't judge me. You could even say that. Don't judge me, but I'm curious about living in Mexico. I noticed that you've lived there. I would love a 15-minute coffee chat on Zoom. Like that could be your very first step. Now, that is what I call intentional networking. Okay. And you do not have to be full time employed in order to do this. You have every right. Here's why. You're going to hop on the phone with that person or on Zoom or whatever, and they're going to be like, oh my goodness, it's been 100 years. What's new? And you could obviously share that you're a mom, you have two kids, what's new in their world. And chances are, if they're any human, they're going to want to talk to you about their kids way more than their career anyways. So
Mhm.
you're kind of a shoo-in if you're coming in from that perspective. And the big key idea here is your intention. So as long as your intention is clean and clear when you approach anyone, even strangers, which is what I help a lot of mom founders with to build their business through networking. But as long as your intention is clean and clear, then you have every right to approach any human being that you're connected to and not connected to, someone that you see is already or has already had an experience that is interesting to you. Okay.
Mm.
So that's the very next step. It's like, okay, I have 5 people that they lived in Mexico and I think that they have kids, or maybe you could look at their activity and maybe they have spoken about this. And you can approach them on the very level of you're a mom and you're curious about Mexico. It's not about getting a job. It's not about getting a client. It's just human to human. Okay. And then you start asking questions that really, really matter to you. So for me, a lot of the things that I've done, if I knew what they entailed, I would not have done them. So if someone told me, okay, Melissa, writing a book is going to take you 2 years and you're going to go from living in Australia to living in the United States, and you're going to have to then get physical therapy because your neck was messed up from looking at a page for 12 hours, I wouldn't have done my book. So
Mm.
what you do is you start with that. Like, what are you afraid of? What's the hardest part? So you could ask that person. Literally, you could say, when you went to live in Mexico, what was the most surprising thing? What was the hardest thing to do? Right? And that's how you start to like calm your nerves and build like the braver girl muscles, right? I have 3 boys, so in the book I have this story where we would challenge our 3 boys to try new foods. So when we were in Japan to try these different sushis, or we were in any other place. And so we give them this braver boy award. Why not be a braver mamacita, and like really exercise and flex your muscles? And if you're afraid of something, lead with that question. I'm most afraid that my kids are going to hate me if I move them and peel them away from their friends. That might be a question that is on your heart. But chances are, if the idea is there, you have everything you need, and it's okay to actually at least take one step forward.
Yeah, it's like giving yourself permission to, yeah, to go further and, you know, and oftentimes, like, again, like culturally speaking, it's like, I know, estoy mensa, like, estoy tonta, for even thinking that. And, and yes, like, I think that most of us have grown up with this limited mindset and it is so hard. It takes a lot of work. But I think by doing those tangible steps gives you that permission, and I never thought about networking in that way. That is awesome.
Yeah, that is the only way. Here's something else. I know that you had mentioned it a little bit earlier, like a little bit of this like guilt, right? Like I'm a mom, sacrificial. Here I am taking time away from my kids. For me, what I have done as a business owner for 13 years and what has worked for me is I have my clients do an exercise that's called like a company vision rewrite. And that vision has to be really one that pulls you, which I mentioned in terms of fertile imagination, and you have to really feel pulled by your mission. But on top of that, it has to include your kids. Let me tell you, if I did not see my own podcast, Mom Founder Imagination Hub, as a treasure trove for my 3 children who one day might have a business idea, who one day might need one of the fancy schmancy people that have been a podcast guest on my podcast, I don't know I would have gone to episode 241 under the circumstances that I've had to execute every single Tuesday.
Mm.
But for me, that company vision, it's a twofer, right? So it's not just like, oh, this is my audacious goal, and it's also for my children. So I am not about to just, try to make a lot of money or try to, even though that's not bad, but for me, I can't lie to myself. I'm not driven by money, but I'm driven by my boys. And if I know I could find that person who can help fund their business idea when they grow up, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep
Mm.
going. Now it's worth it for me, even more so. So that's something I wanted to just add.
Yes. Yes. It definitely gives perspective about, you're allowing them to dream big and to have an imagination also as they grow up. And I almost think about how, this ties in with leaving a legacy as well. It's not just, yes, you are a good role model to them and you are showing them how they can build a business in this example, but it's more so you are leaving that legacy for them so that way they can further progress in their lives and they don't have that level of struggle that you perhaps had when you started a business. And so that is awesome. What would you say if a mom though dreams big, right? Who has this fertile imagination, but perhaps she doesn't have the energy to do so because she's tired or because she thinks that she has limited capacities, whether if it's financial or with time. What would you say to that? Because oftentimes, we can dream big, we can imagine, but for some reason we think that we're not able to because of financial means or because we have different priorities. What are your thoughts on that?
There's a lot that we can learn from our ancestors who had way less than us. In my book, for example, I talk about my grandmother, my abuela, who came from communist Cuba and did not have an education, right? And she barely, I mean, no, she did not know English when she got to the US. That's a fact. And she pretended not to know after like 30, 40 years in the US, but that's another story for another day. The point is, she didn't have resources, right? She didn't have resources, but what she did have was the ability to speak up for herself. And she had like a little inner hustler inside of herself, right? Think about it. Like when you're raised in a communist place or the place becomes communist, you then start getting very like creative, right? Hiding like that extra bag of coffee in a certain spot under the bed, or figuring out your own way of like creating an economy, right? Like selling, I don't even know, like being a seamstress for like someone that is in the neighborhood and wants to do a quinceañera. How inventive were the people that came before us? So for us to have, for the most part, more resources to say we don't have the time or energy, come on now. Let's be creative, okay? Let's
Mm.
go back to our abuelas. Let's go back to our bisabuelas. If you have that privilege, my God, that would have been amazing to meet mine. And let's just think to ourselves, okay, great. They didn't have the resources, but what did they have? They had the chutzpah, the guts, the cojones. I don't know if we're allowed to say that. They had the audacity to say, you know what? I'm not able to buy a $10,000 wedding dress, but I have a best friend who has a sewing machine and she has extra tela lying here and there. And we're going to make something that's going to make Princess Di jealous. I know that's like old school reference, but they were very creative. So, what does that mean? That means, okay, great. You have these constraints. You don't have a lot of time. Fine. So, what do you have to do? You have to be really honest with yourself. Because here's what I know about a lot of people that say they don't have a lot of time. It's not that. They haven't made their idea a priority. Okay. Now, that's one step. And here's the other thing. For me, I was really like getting on myself, beating myself up because I thought I was really bad at self care, right? Because I really associated self care with going to the beautician, getting my nails done, getting massages. I don't know. That was just what I thought about was self
Mhm.
care. When then the person that was interviewing me on another podcast I was on, she's like, well, do you ever go to the gym? And I'm like, yes, I take the 5:30 a.m. class 4 times a week. And I've been doing that for years. And then she's like, oh, do you ever like meditate? I was like, yes. And I'm becoming a meditation practitioner. And I did a silent retreat in my house. Right. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I'm actually really good at self care. I just have the wrong definition. So,
Mm.
like, it's interesting because if you prioritize something, then it becomes like, I don't know, part of your everyday, right? If you stop putting things on a pedestal, like, oh, okay, I need to feel like I am exuberant and I don't need coffee and I need to be like bouncing up and down in order to like start running for a marathon or something, or start, writing a book or building a business. If you have that level of standard that you have to be like totally with it and totally ready and enthusiastic and have like a chunk of time that you're not going to get interrupted, then guess what? It ain't ever going to happen. So you need to make with what you have, exactly like our ancestors. Again, call it out. Like if you literally, like if I told my abuela, like, okay, abuela, I don't have the time, she would honestly follow me around and be like, why are you watching YouTube? Why are you on your cell phone? Look at your screen time. It's 5 hours a day. Like she would get on my back, right? So same thing. We've got to be honest with ourselves. No, it's not that you don't have the time or the right energy. You didn't make it a priority. Because what happens is once you make something a priority, that means that it has to happen rain or shine, time or no time, energy or no energy. And that's the only way a big, audacious goal or dream happens.
Mm.
Only if you're able to find a way to continue doing what's necessary when you feel so drained, when you're in the middle of a global relocation, like I was in writing my book, when you just ate a huge plate for dinner and you feeling guilty, guess what? You still got to go to the gym the next day, even with that guilt, right? So you have to be proactive. That's the one thing I would say is really important. So already know that you're not going to feel up to it, period. That is a fact. So you have to be proactive. What helps me feel more energized? And for me, it's going to the gym. And for me, as much as I like my cultural food, rice and beans, and, all these things, I personally have edited my cuisine to be more healthy, less processed, and that's another thing that has helped my energy. And I even have it in the book. It's funny because I interviewed someone that is a white Jewish man, James Altucher, and he told me things that I was like, yep, I'm aligned. I want your energy. He's like 10 years older than me. So he literally was saying, you have to sleep. And I know, first year, you're not going to sleep. Identical twins, I exclusively nursed my firstborn. And that was obviously really crazy hard.
Mhm.
But then with identical twins, I decided to do the same for them. Now, if you read the book, you'll understand my pathway there was different. But, it's something that you have to really make a decision like, okay, wait, do I want to have energy? What's going to make my environment such that I'm going to have more energy? So you got to be on purpose. This isn't just going to happen. You have to say to yourself, no, I'm going to put an alarm to go to bed at, I'm making this up, 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and I'm going to adhere to it, right? Or I'm not going to watch this or that or whatever, right? But then it's also like saying to yourself, okay, I don't have a lot of resources. No excuse. We have no excuse. As a Latina, I'm sorry. That is not worthy of an excuse. Look at your abuelita, your bisabuela. Go ahead. Tell them. Tell them. They're gonna look at you and be like, "Excuse me, excuse me. we
Yep.
came we came to America. Excuse me. You better come correct, right, to your abuelita or to your mom or no, 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 no. I'm just not taking it." So
Yep.
when I saw my mom who has manic depression, right? When I saw my mom and she wasn't able to do certain things like finish college, for example, she has her associates, and I saw that, like, I knew for me it was like this was like not a consideration. Like Melissa will finish college, right? And how? Well, I had to figure out who was going to pay for college, so I had to bust my tush to get full rides. What did that mean? I had to look for those grants. I had to then sacrifice to like write the most perfect essays you could possibly think of, right? And I had to do that in the middle of going with my mom to like, a psychiatrist appointment or one of her ups and downs. Yeah, just turn to someone who came before you and tell them, I don't have resources, I don't have time. And they're going to be like, excuse me?
Yes. So you hear it. There is no excuse. Like, even though we may be in the thick of it, like, we should give ourselves permission to imagine and then stick to it. Because then, and that all falls back with our very own mental health of like not being content or being the positive person that we wish we could be. And so I appreciate you giving that perspective because, yeah, there's no excuse. Like our ancestors have paved the way for us, and that way we can dream big and imagine. Yes. And so you did mention that you interview folks on your book, and I love that you had that opportunity because it gives a better perspective about people's lived experiences. And then you give like examples and even strategies. And so like with you saying about like the energy piece, like as I was like, I still need to read your book fully. I think this is something that I'm going to do because we're actually going to New York next week. And so, yeah, I actually want to read through the entire book. But as I was skimming through and that energy piece, that was an example that I read. Like, I'm like, oh, I love this. You interviewed someone and then you provided strategies and ways and how you can overcome and actually gain energy back. And so, what are some examples that you mentioned in the book, like some stories that you can share when it comes to, yeah, like the people that are in your book?
So, what I will say is this: I think we're surrounded by very diverse perspectives. And we might be physically based in one spot in the world, right? So, right now I'm in Austin. But what I would invite anyone that's listening and yourself too to consider is that someone outside of our borders in another country that might not be a mom, maybe they could help us, in terms of just like having a conversation with an open perspective and understanding, okay, I'm trying to build a business. I'm trying to do a podcast, write a book, or whatever dream you have on your heart. I don't have people around me that that I can point to and say like, oh yeah, my Titi Margie or whatever. That's what Puerto Ricans call her, Aunt Titi. My Titi Margie, was this like, I don't know, mayor or whatever of a town. So what does that mean? That means open yourself up to different perspectives, and because we're able to talk to people with Zoom as an example or any video technology, be unafraid in terms of going first and taking the initiative to see if someone else has already solved a challenge. I'll give you an example. So, for example, I interviewed the former CMO of GE. Now, this person, if anyone is more of my generation, so I'm 45 years old. If anybody is more of my generation, this person was in charge of GE during a very complicated time. And GE is known for like, light bulbs and kind of like manufacturing boring things. So the CMO at the time, Beth Comstock, she noticed that in South Korea, okay, that there were these K-pop singers and like Korean pop, right? And so she noticed that they had the most loyal fans. And what she decided to do was fly to South Korea and to see why was that. And then once she did, she brought back those insights to GE, right? Now, you might say to yourself, like, what does it have to do with me being a mom? Here's what I know to be true. I have gone to, as an example, children's book areas of libraries almost everywhere in the world. And it's the same thing everywhere you go. Like when I lived in Australia, I would go to the children's book library there. I would see the same thing. Moms that were sleepless, looking at their cell phones, just begging for their kid to be entertained and to read and grab a book and give them that peace for like a couple of seconds, right? So what am I saying by that? Point of the matter is that other people have probably solved your challenge, whether it's as a mom, maybe it's even as a wife, or it's, someone that wants to relocate to Mexico. do not be afraid to find people that don't look like you or don't have the same, background as yourself, and see if they might have answers. Because what we are trying to do right now in this age of technology is something that has never happened before. Right? We're trying to feel like we are capable moms who have value and are talented and can do really great things. And at the same time, be really great moms,
Mm.
like at the same time. And I know a lot of us struggle with this idea that if you're really killing it in business, then you're abandoning your kids essentially, or the opposite. If you're like with your kids all the time, you're letting go of your business and it's not going to grow. And so that challenge, it's a challenge that's very global around the world. However, give yourself that ability to ask a bunch of people who are doing really well in different categories of their lives so that you can just learn and be a sponge. And here's why. Because we don't know what the future holds, right? So like with AI, for example, we don't know what sort of skills and talents and abilities we are going to need. But what we do know, and what a lot of us are really good at, is we're always going to need relationships. We're always going to need community. We're always going to need other human beings who, they can like warn us of what's coming and we can help them with what's coming and we can learn from each other. Right.
Mm.
So again, it's back to the village piece of it. And I think, understanding that we have to be more playing like offensive, right? As opposed to like just defensive. It's about, again, stretching yourself and talking to people that you might feel like you have no right talking to
Mm.
at all. Like for me, that's the most important part in terms of what I teach my kids. So you know how like a lot of people, they're like, don't talk to strangers, don't talk to strangers. Well, I gotta be really honest. A lot of the things that I have witnessed and seen, it's not so much strangers,
Mm.
sometimes not so great things happen right in our homes. And so this whole stranger danger thing, I believe in it. I'm not going to have my kids at risk, but at the same time, I don't want my kids to feel intimidated by people that look fancy schmancy or people that have different life experiences. That's how I integrate my work life balance. You know, with my kids, for example, the same way I put together my book, Fertile Imagination, is the same way that I have taught my kids how to talk to strangers. So, for example, when the Olympics were happening in Japan during the pandemic that they paused it for that year, I had my kids reach out to the person that designed one of the stadiums. It's a Japanese man. Do you think I knew this guy? Absolutely not. But I had them figure out, okay, let's write this email together and tell this Japanese man who designed the stadium that you found his, stadium beautiful, and that was it. So we start with the intention, clean and pure. I'm not asking him for money or anything. And then we put out that email to this person, right? So he responded. Like he actually responded to me and my kids. And that's like a testament. It's like, you know what? People are really gracious if you're coming at it from like a pure intention perspective. On top of that, globally, a lot of the people, they like kids. So, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's not like they're going to be met with this like big no that's going to like harm them for the rest of their lives. So the same idea with my book, when I put it together, I was talking to people that I didn't know. I was following my intuition. I
Mm.
literally went to a bookstore in Australia. I saw a book there that I thought was really interesting. I opened it up. I interviewed the author on my podcast. And then I reached out to her editor to help me with my book. This lady's
Mm.
in Pennsylvania. I'm Puerto Rican and Cuban. Again, so random, right? But still, I'm learning from that person. She's a mom whose kids are already graduated, and she's reminded of her own, early motherhood days from working with me, and there's value there in that relationship, right? Now I've opened the world to my children. If my kids want to go to university in Australia, there's an opportunity there, right? If they want to do business in Australia, there's an opportunity there. So at the end of the day, it's like these are the stories that I'm writing, but my kids are reading. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And it's cool. Like we went to the library the other day here in Austin, Texas, And in the library, they have the nonfiction section and they have fiction. And my book, Fertile Imagination, is in the nonfiction section. And when you open my book in our local library, it says my children's name at the end in terms of, the thank you pages, right? The acknowledgments. Do you know what that feels like? Like, I didn't have that. There was no
Yeah.
library where my mom wrote my name and I could go and I see it. And that for me is what drives me. I think anyone that's out of this conversation, like if you want to write a book, like step one, so easy. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll give you the next step.
And for me, I think it's you're building capital, you're building this human capital. And it is so important because, yeah, it all ties back with okay, if I want to go to school here, okay, I already know the person. If I want to
Mhm.
build a business or I want to write a book in this example, I know who to connect because you already have built that capital. And that is so important, especially when you're putting in your kids, right? And I love that you're giving this example. And really, that's where life is taking you, right? Like your purpose is so that your kids can do better and know where they'd want to go and you know how to connect them with the world around them. And so I love this. Thank you so much for sharing all of this because yeah, I think there's a lot of great nuggets that mamas can like pull from this conversation so that way, you're allowing yourself to imagine but it goes further, right? And it's more so how are you going to essentially give your kids to allow themselves to imagine as well. And so it's like a trickle effect, which is awesome, or a domino effect in this case. Yes.
Got me cool right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you help mom founders? How do you use the insights from the book to bring their best selves to motherhood and to be the best version of themselves as moms, but also as business owners as well?
So when I wrote the book, I had two parts of my three-part method in mind, right? So, imagination and really making sure that you have a fertile imagination. But then as I started coaching mom founders using some of the concepts from the book, I really thought through my method in terms of building those relationships because you're right. Human capital is where it's at. And that's how I help mom founders, right? So I basically take this idea that a lot of us want income in terms of the fruits of our labor, all of this being related to a fertile mind that we have, right? Productive and being able to like grow and bear fruit. And I've come up with a method that I walk mom founders through. So it's the imagination to impact to income method. And that three-step method is how I help mom founders build relationships that they need even before they need it and have a way to include their kids in the process. So the idea is producing these profitable relationships. And on September 23rd, I'm doing a free masterclass where I'm helping mom founders come up with like a 30-day laser focused profitable, relationship building calendar for themselves, right? And what's cool about that is that we're going to start with the company vision, kind of like I said, and include our kids in our vision because that's more fuel. And then we're going to go into focus, which I know a lot of us moms have a hard time doing, right? We have distractions, we have so many things on our plate and all of that. So we're going to focus on that one thing that we should really hone in on, use our finite energy towards, and at the same time, find a way so that we are energized by everything around us, whether it's by our own children, whether it's by the company vision. Like we can't afford to have leaks of energy, right? So it's all about that focus. How are we going to focus our energy? And then the third part is imposter syndrome. So here's
Mm.
what I have found it's not unique to moms. It's common to a lot of people, but it's important for us to acknowledge. I personally have not found a way to get rid of imposter syndrome. And so what I decided to do, and part of this is in the book and it's part of my method, is I figured out, okay, let me use it as an asset. Let me use it in my favor. Because here's the reality. In the course of a mom day, for example, like you could be literally like changing diapers and looking at poop. who's not going to feel like an imposter if 2 hours later you're in a boardroom where you just came from, a stinky experience? So
Mm.
it's kind of top of mind for a lot of us, feeling like we don't belong, or like, we're stuck in our mom role, and here we are, in some sort of corporate environment, or like pitching ourselves. So what we need to do is find a way to own the fact that we feel how we do and not make ourselves feel bad about it. Right. So I came up with a method called the ACE method that is proactive, right? So you're using it as an asset. How might it be possible that the fact that you don't have experience in an industry is an advantage? Maybe it's because you're solving a business challenge that has been around forever. Clearly, no one has solved it, and you're bringing a fresh perspective. So that's using it as an asset. Or in community. So maybe you're scared to go to networking events, but you have a friend who you could go with, and then obviously you would separate at the event. And then the third one is, evidence. Maybe there are other categories in your life where you're really good at a particular thing that you can then bring up in small talk with someone that you're networking with. All of that to say, the book starts the conversation. It's all about, okay, first let's get a fertile imagination. Then with coaching with me, it's about continuing the conversation. Great. Now you have a fertile imagination. How are we going to direct its focus? And then how are you going to come up with income related to where you apply your focus?
Mm. I love it. I love it. Yes, and I would love to share your masterclass. I think it would really help people to set, a foundation and for them to get started in their businesses, for any entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs out there. And so I'll make sure to share that in the show notes. And Melissa, where can people connect with you, and where can people buy your book as well?
Absolutely. So go to fertileideas.com. That website, you're going to be able to get a free book chapter if you're interested in hearing or reading one of my book chapters. You can also, of course, anywhere that you enjoy books, like Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, everywhere that you can imagine or not imagine, right? And I am also on my website, fertileideas.com. You can also see there a quiz that I have for entrepreneurial moms. So if you feel stuck and you're not sure why, then this is where you go take a quick quiz, and you could see whether it's because your imagination is dry, whether it's imposter syndrome, or whether you're just not playing enough with your kids, which is a very novel idea, but I've seen that to be the case and the answer. So fertileideas.com is the place to go. That is where you can catch a lot of these freebies. I also, because I know you mentioned that you hadn't thought about networking for like a global relocation, but I have a playbook on that website, fertileideas.com, a networking playbook. In that networking playbook, you can see some of the language that I use for my emails to total strangers, and just copy, paste, and edit it. So it's free for now. I do intend to put it behind a paywall soon, but it's free for now. And it's the networking playbook for mom business owners. And if you're an introvert, I include some tips there for you too, so you don't feel so out there. So go to fertileideas.com. That's the best place to get all these freebies. And to connect with me, absolutely go on LinkedIn. I want to just get as many Latina moms on LinkedIn as humanly possible. I cannot say I see enough of us out there. You know what I mean? Like I want to see us like swimming in the LinkedIn juice, because that, if you're a business owner, that's where you have a lot of clients that have the bigger budgets on LinkedIn. And we need to be in places where people have the capital to actually pay us what we deserve, in terms of our talents and skills. So go to LinkedIn and connect with me. Just let me know, hey, I heard you on this podcast, Viva la Mami, and I will say yes. So you're going to get a yes from me.
I love this. Oh my gosh. I really appreciate you sharing this wealth of information, and really to let us and giving us permission to imagine, because we shouldn't let that go. We should allow ourselves to imagine and bring back that fertile imagination that you said, because I love how it's interconnected with our ancestors also.
We owe it to them.
Yes.
We owe it to them.
Yes. And one last question before we leave. How are you redefining motherhood?
So in the book, it's about rewriting the script. When I was a little girl, I remember sitting on a rocking chair, looking at a novela or some sort of primer impacto or something in Florida with my grandmother. And my grandmother got on my case. She's like, no husband is going to marry you because all you do is watch TV. I was 5 years old. Let's just be clear on that. But she tells me this whole thing, right? And I told her, I said, well, you know what? Then that man is not for me, right? Fresca, I know. But I had it in me back then to redefine whatever role I was playing. So in my book, I have redefined motherhood to really be about, okay, I may have seen it play out, in terms of my mom, in terms of the abuelas on both sides, but I'm different. I want different things. The technology supports what I want so that I don't have to be away from my kids. And for me, motherhood is about not just my kids' future, but it's about mine too. And I get to go after my dreams side by side with my kids going after their own dreams. So it's a side by side thing. We're all doing it at the same time. I am not yet ready to hand the baton to my kids and give up on what I want. That baton gets handed off when I'm dead, to be honest.
I love that. Oh my gosh. You literally gave me goosebumps cuando dijiste que I'm not ready to pass on the baton because, yeah, we shouldn't lose ourselves. We shouldn't just let go of our dreams, of our imagination, because then our kids won't get to see that. And then it creates this sort of like cycle of not trying to aspire like with the best version that you're trying to be, or even allow yourself to dream big and imagine. And so, this is great. I really want to thank you and, thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak with you today and for you to share your wisdom and story with us, because I think the message that you share is so impactful and so important, especially for us mamas who are feeling stuck. And I hope that by you being here, like they have this clear direction to go to. So gracias, amiga. Thank you so much for being here.
Gracias.
Mujer, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to the Viva la Mami podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, will you do me a favor and follow the podcast and leave a rating and review? Hitting that follow button and reviewing my show will allow other mommies like you find this podcast. Your review will also tell me if you enjoy the show, so I would truly appreciate your thoughts. Don't forget, please share this podcast con tus amigas. Also, make sure to follow me at Viva la Mami on Instagram or visit vivalamami.com. Please note the information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as professional advice. Okay, mujer, thank you for joining y nos vemos in the next episode.